My 6-year-old son stood at the back door and screamed for me because our dog walked into the kitchen. Not a stranger's dog. Not a scary dog. Biscuit, the dog Caleb had slept curled up against every single night for 2 years. That was the moment I knew something had been broken in my house, and I knew exactly who broke it. Let me back up. 3 years ago, about 8 months after my husband Derek and I moved into our place in Clover Ridge, we finally got a dog. We talked about it for years. We both grew up with dogs. We wanted space and stability first, and once we had both, we went for it. Caleb was 3 years old at the time, obsessed with every living thing that moved: bugs, birds, squirrels. A dog made complete sense. We drove out to the Millfield Animal Rescue on a Saturday morning in March. We were just looking, being responsible, getting a feel for the place. Then a shelter worker opened a door to one of the play yards, and out came this golden retriever and lab mix, about 18 months old, all paws and floppy ears. He walked straight up to Caleb and sat down in front of him like they had a scheduled meeting. Caleb put both hands on the dog's face and said, "Hi, doggy." The dog licked him once on the nose. We were done. We filled out the paperwork that afternoon. $195 in adoption fees, plus another $340 that first month in supplies, a crate, food, and a vet visit. Worth every single cent. We named him Biscuit. Biscuit is the most gentle dog I have ever been around in my life. He is terrified of the vacuum cleaner but totally unbothered by thunderstorms. Every morning he carries a single sock around the house, doesn't chew it, just holds it, like it's a security object. He slept at the foot of Caleb's bed every night. When Caleb had nightmares and cried, Biscuit would get up, walk to the head of the bed, and press his whole body against Caleb's side until the crying stopped. I watched this happen multiple times on the baby monitor we still had set up in that room. That dog was Caleb's best friend and his nighttime guardian. No exaggeration. So when I say my in-laws broke something in my house, I mean it literally. They broke the bond between my little boy and his dog, and it took 3 full months of deliberate, careful work to fix it. Derek's parents, his mother Vivienne and his father Ronald, live about 40 minutes away in Hartwell. They're retired. They visit often. Too often, in my opinion, but Derek is their only son, and I've tried to be understanding about that. They're not terrible people across the board. Vivienne makes Caleb birthday cakes from scratch. Ronald takes him to the hardware store and lets him pick out nuts and bolts to play with. They love Caleb. I've never doubted that. But they do not like Biscuit. The dislike started about 2 years ago with one incident. Biscuit was still new to the house, still a year and a half old with too much energy, still learning his manners. Vivienne came over for Sunday dinner, and when she walked through the door, Biscuit jumped up on her. He did that to everyone back then. He was excited. He got muddy paw prints on her cream-colored blazer. She was upset. That's a fair reaction. I apologized, I covered her dry cleaning, and I called a trainer that same week. $65 a session, 8 sessions total, specifically to work on the jumping. Biscuit stopped jumping on guests within 6 weeks. Vivienne did not move on. About 3 months after the blazer, she was sitting at the kitchen table while I cut birthday cake for Caleb's 4th birthday, and she said out of nowhere, "I read that labs can turn aggressive around children. Something about their prey drive." I said, "Biscuit is the calmest dog I've ever owned, Vivienne." She shrugged and said she was just sharing what she'd read. I let it go. 2 months after that, she pulled me aside after a family dinner and told me it might be worth considering rehoming Biscuit before Caleb got too attached. I stared at her. I said, "He's already attached, Vivienne. That ship sailed about 15 minutes after we got him." She said she just worried about Caleb's safety. I said Biscuit had never shown any aggression toward anyone. She said dogs can be fine for years and then just snap. I told Derek. He said his mom was just anxious and she'd come around. I said okay. I should not have said okay. I should have pushed harder right then. Because the comments kept coming, and what I didn't fully register at first was that they weren't all directed at me anymore. Some of them were directed at Caleb. The first time I caught it, Caleb was 5. A Thursday afternoon in October. The in-laws had stopped by unannounced, which is its own issue, and I was in the laundry room folding clothes. I could hear the living room clearly. I heard Vivienne say to Caleb, "You should be careful when Biscuit gets too excited. Dogs bite when they get too excited, you know." I walked out immediately. Biscuit was not too excited. Biscuit was lying on the rug chewing a rope toy. I said, "Biscuit is perfectly calm, Vivienne." She smiled and said she was just teaching Caleb to be aware. I looked at Caleb. He was staring at Biscuit with a look on his face that wasn't quite fear yet, but it was getting there. Like he was reconsidering something. I told Derek that night. He called his parents. He said they agreed to stop making comments. He said it was handled. It was not handled. Over the next 4 months, I caught fragments. Dogs don't always mean to hurt kids, but they can. Never put your face near a dog's face, Caleb. If Biscuit ever growls, you run straight to Grandma, okay? Every single time I walked into a room and shut it down, Vivienne said she was just being safety conscious, just teaching him healthy respect for animals. Ronald backed her up every time. He'd say, "She's right, a dog is still an animal." United front. Every time. Caleb started sleeping with his door closed. He said he wanted it that way. He'd never wanted that before. Biscuit started sleeping on the hallway floor outside Caleb's room, just waiting. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad yet. Caleb still petted Biscuit in the mornings, still threw the ball with him in the yard. It wasn't that bad yet. Then came February. Caleb had a bad cold, home from school. Vivienne offered to come over and help because I had a client call I couldn't reschedule. I do freelance accounting from home, and this particular meeting had already been pushed back twice. I said yes. I went into my home office and closed the door. The meeting was 90 minutes. When I came out, Caleb was on the couch wrapped in a blanket. Vivienne was across from him in the armchair. Biscuit was shut in the laundry room. I could hear him whimpering. I said, "Why is Biscuit in the laundry room?" Vivienne said he had tried to jump on Caleb while Caleb was sick, and she didn't think that was appropriate. I said Biscuit hadn't jumped on anyone in over 2 years. She said he was acting too energetic. I opened the laundry room door. Biscuit hadn't destroyed anything. He was just sitting there looking miserable, sock in his mouth, tail low. I let him out. He went straight to Caleb. And Caleb, my kid, who had slept next to this dog every night for 2 years, pulled his feet up onto the couch cushion and said, "No, Biscuit. Go away." My stomach dropped. I looked at Vivienne. She was watching me with this expression I can't fully describe. It wasn't quite satisfied, but it was close. I got Biscuit's leash, took him outside, sat on the back step, and stayed there long enough to get clear on what I was actually dealing with. Because in that moment, I understood that this had not been occasional careless comments. This had been a slow, deliberate campaign. Vivienne had spent months frightening my 5-year-old about his own dog, and it had worked. I called my friend Tamsin that night after Caleb went to bed. Tamsin has known me since college, and she has a sharper head for conflict than I do. She listened to the whole thing and said, "Mara, she did this on purpose. This was not anxiety. This was control." I had already come to that conclusion, but hearing someone else say it made it solid. Derek was upset when I laid it all out for him. He said, "She shouldn't have done that," and he called his mother while I sat next to him on the couch. He told her the Biscuit comments had to stop, that she'd frightened Caleb, that it wasn't acceptable. Vivienne cried. Of course she cried. She said she was only trying to protect her grandson. She said she was sorry if Caleb was upset. She said she had no idea the comments were having that effect. I don't believe that for 1 second. Derek got off the phone and said, "She feels terrible." I said, "I need her to not come here for a while." He said, "Mara, she said sorry." We argued for an hour. He genuinely could not see the depth of what had happened from where he was standing. I don't think he was trying to dismiss me. He just couldn't see it. So I did what I should have done months earlier. I sent Vivienne and Ronald one text, no back and forth. I said, "Until Caleb is comfortable with Biscuit again, I'm not comfortable with visits to the house. When that changes, I'll let you know. This is not up for discussion." Vivienne did not respond to me. She called Derek, and then the phone tree started. Derek's sister Paige texted me the next morning. Paige is 34, 2 years younger than Derek. We've always been cordial but not close. Her text said, "Mara, I don't think cutting Mom off from Caleb is the right move. She's his grandmother and she adores him." I put my phone face down on the counter. Half an hour later, Derek's Aunt Connie, a woman I have met maybe 6 times in 5 years, called my cell. I didn't pick up. She left a 4-minute voicemail about how family is everything, how Vivienne was sobbing, how banning grandparents from seeing their grandchild was cruel. 4 minutes. from a woman I barely know. Then my mother-in-law's friend Bet, a woman I have met exactly twice, sent me a Facebook message. A Facebook message. It said Vivienne was heartbroken and I was being unreasonable. I don't even know how Bet found my profile. Tamsin came over that Friday night with wine and a casserole. I read her all the messages. She said, "Mara, this is not a coincidence. Vivienne called every single one of these people." Yep, I knew that. What I also knew was that none of these people had been in my house. None of them had watched my son pull his feet away from his own dog. None of them were going to fix anything. So I made 2 calls I'm glad I made. First, I called our vet, Dr. Ackhaffer at Millfield Animal Clinic, and I asked her to document Biscuit's behavioral history in a formal written note. I explained what was happening, that someone was making claims about my dog's temperament to family members, and I wanted it on record what she actually observed in 3 years of visits. She said, "Absolutely, Mara. Biscuit is one of the most well-mannered dogs I see. I'll have something written up by Monday." Then I called Marcus, the trainer who had worked with us. He remembered Biscuit well. He said Biscuit had tested in the top tier of his group class. He had a written statement to me by the end of the week. I wasn't planning to sue anyone. I wasn't filing anything, but I wanted documentation. I wanted something in writing that said my dog was not what Vivienne had been telling my son he was. I wanted it to exist. Derek and I had 3 more arguments that week. The most important one happened on a Wednesday night after Caleb was asleep. Derek said he thought I was going too far, that banning his parents was a serious step, that Caleb needed his grandparents. I said, "Caleb is afraid of his dog." He said, "He'll get over it." I said, "He will not get over it without help, and your mother actively caused it, and I am not letting her near him and Biscuit in the same space until things are different." Derek went quiet, then he said, "What do you need from me?" That was the turn. That was the moment I knew he was actually going to get on board. I told him I needed him to stop taking his mother's calls while she was upset and reporting them back to me like I was supposed to manage her feelings. I needed him to back me up with Paige and Connie and Bet and whoever else Vivienne had recruited. And I needed him to help me help Caleb. He did all 3, not perfectly, not immediately, but he did them. For Caleb, I made an appointment with a child therapist named Dr. Featherly who specialized in anxiety. I found her through our pediatrician. The intake was $180 and $140 per session after that. I would have paid double. I explained to Dr. Featherly what had happened. Someone Caleb trusted had spent months telling him his dog was dangerous. She said this was real and it was fixable. She gave me a structured plan for gradual reintroduction and some specific language to use with Caleb about what was true and what wasn't true about Biscuit. She also said something I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "What your son learned is that someone he loves told him to be scared. What he needs to learn is that someone else he loves is telling him it's safe." I went home and started that same day. I sat with Caleb on the living room floor, Biscuit across the room at a distance, and I talked to him about dogs, not in a scary way, in a facts way. I told him Biscuit had lived with us for almost 3 years and had never once hurt anyone. I told him I understood he'd heard some things that worried him, and those things weren't true about Biscuit. I told him Biscuit missed him. Caleb looked at Biscuit from across the room and said, "Is Biscuit sad?" I said, "A little bit. He doesn't understand why you don't want to be near him." Caleb was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Did Grandma tell Biscuit things too?" I had to work very hard to keep my voice steady. I said, "No, buddy. Grandma was talking to you, not Biscuit. And some of the things Grandma said weren't quite right." We did 15 minutes of being in the same room as Biscuit that day. No interaction, just presence. The next day, 20 minutes. The day after that, I handed Caleb a treat and told him he could give it to Biscuit from his hand if he wanted to. He held it out. Biscuit took it so gently it barely registered. Caleb giggled, actual, real giggling. I stayed completely calm on the outside. On the inside, I was collapsing with relief. That was the first week of March. By the end of March, Caleb was walking Biscuit around the backyard on a leash. By mid-April, Biscuit was back at the foot of Caleb's bed. Now, the confrontation with Vivienne. About 6 weeks after I sent that text, Vivienne showed up at our house on a Saturday afternoon. No call, no text, just knocked on the door. Derek was home, I answered it. She looked composed. She had a gift bag, probably for Caleb. I said, Vivienne, I told you I'd reach out when I was ready for visits. We're not there yet. She said, I just want to see my grandson. I said, I understand that. But I watched my son pull away from his dog because of things you told him, and I'm still dealing with that. She started to say it was just safety advice. I cut her off. I said, you told my 5-year-old that dogs bite when they get excited. Biscuit was lying on a rug chewing a toy when you said that. You told him to run from Biscuit if he growled. Biscuit has never growled at him once. You locked my dog in the laundry room while you were supposed to be helping with my sick kid. That was not safety advice. That was a campaign. She said I was being dramatic. I said, my son's therapist agrees with my read on this. I have written documentation from our vet and our trainer that Biscuit has 0 behavioral issues. And until Caleb is fully himself again around his dog, you do not come into this house. She looked at Derek, he didn't move. He said, Mom, she's right, you need to go. She left without a word. She didn't take the gift bag. Ronald called Derek that evening and told him he was a disappointment. Derek told his father that supporting his wife and son was not something he was going to apologize for, and he ended the call. I'm not going to pretend that was easy for Derek. He had about 2 weeks of low-grade misery working through his parents' reaction, trying not to take it out on me. He was mostly successful. We were honest with each other. That part, at least, went okay. About 3 weeks after the doorstep confrontation, Paige texted me again with a softer message. She said she'd been thinking about it, she didn't actually know the full story, and she was sorry she jumped in on her mother's side. I told her some of what had happened. She went quiet for a bit and then said, yeah, that's not okay. Mom can be like that. I didn't ask what she meant by that. I didn't need to. Paige has come over for dinner twice since then. She pets Biscuit like a normal person. He loves her for it. Connie and Bet I simply do not engage with. Life is short. As for Ronald and Vivienne, they are not currently welcome in my home. That might change eventually. I haven't completely closed the door on a future where things are different, but that door is very far from here, and there are a lot of steps between us and it. Derek decided that himself. He said he needed his parents to actually reckon with what they'd done before he wanted them back in his life in any meaningful way. They have not done that reckoning. They gave an apology, but it was entirely of the I'm sorry you felt that way variety. That is not a real apology. So here we are. Here is where we are right now, and this is the part I really want you to hear. Last Tuesday night, I was doing the dishes after dinner. Derek was in the living room. Caleb was supposed to be in bed. It was already 8:45, 30 minutes past bedtime. I heard little feet on the stairs. I was about to go enforce the bedtime when I heard him stop in the living room. I heard him say, Biscuit, come on. I heard the dog get up off the floor and follow him back upstairs. Caleb's door closed, Biscuit's nails on the hardwood going to the end of the bed, then silence. Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. He'd heard it too. I said, don't. Because I could feel my eyes getting embarrassingly wet and I did not want to make it a whole thing. He said, noted, and went back to the couch. Biscuit sleeps at the foot of Caleb's bed every night now. The sock is back in his mouth every morning when he trots downstairs. He is completely fine. He did not understand what happened. He held no grudge. He just waited until Caleb was ready and then walked right back in. I spent $180 on the intake plus $140 times 8 sessions, $1,300 total, on Caleb's therapy over 3 months. I have 0 regrets about that money. I would spend it again 10 times over. A lot of people who know a filtered version of this story think I went too far. A couple of Derek's cousins have made comments. An old friend of mine said I should pick my battles. But none of those people were in my house when my 6-year-old screamed at the sight of his own dog walking into the kitchen. None of them sat on the living room floor doing careful, deliberate work for 3 months to undo what someone else had done to their child. None of them watched a boy hold out a treat with a shaking hand and then giggle when a dog's soft mouth took it gently. I don't think I was wrong. I think my only real mistake was waiting too long. The first time I heard Vivienne directing a comment about dogs at Caleb specifically, I should have been much clearer about what would happen if it continued. That's my one regret. Not the ban, not the documentation, not the confrontation at the door. Just that I let it go longer than I should have while I told myself it wasn't that bad yet. Biscuit is lying on my feet right now as I type this. He does that in the evenings. He picks a person and parks himself on their feet like he's keeping them from floating away. Right now it's me. I'm not moving. So tell me, at what point would you have drawn the line? Because I second-guessed myself at every single step of this, and I'm genuinely curious whether you would have moved sooner or later than I did.